When I took a college course in historical geology here in Texas, both of my instructors identified as Christian, but on the first day of class, they said, if you believe in Noah's flood now, you won't by next week. And they proceeded to show substantial geological evidence inconsistent with and contradicting flood models of religiously motivated pseudoscience.
There's one other book. I don't have it on me right now, so let me put up a picture if I can remember to do that. It's specifically about the Grand Canyon and refuting claims of people who are trying to say that the Grand Canyon proves a global flood.
There are no data that support a global flood, and this video has simply presented distortions and manipulations and fabrications of data intended to convince people who don't really know any better, but who are just looking for a reason to feel validated in their belief.
Is there any scientific evidence for a global flood? Or is the flood account in Genesis hyperbolic? Are the rock strata best explained by a massive catastrophe or by billions of years with gradual processes? In this video, we will explore global geomorphology in order to answer that question. Okay, let me give you a disclaimer though. I am not a geologist. However, I am a critical thinker who can read. So don't just turn away. This can still be very useful for you, okay? I say this to encourage any of you to study up if you have questions. I don't care what the stigma is. You don't need to have advanced degrees to research a topic, though the truth is it does help a lot. And just so you know, I do have a background in science, specifically a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Maryland. And that is the same degree that Bill Nye has, just to put it in perspective. Okay. Now, I also have a master's in divinity from Liberty University, though that is less pertinent to this discussion in geology. A few years ago, I went on an amazing hike down into the bottom of the Grand Canyon with some brothers in Christ. It was also probably the hardest hike I've ever went on in my life. Now, the Grand Canyon is a wonderful place to study geology, since a large amount of the Earth's history is actually visible in the rock strata. So that is where our discussion will begin and remain for most of the video. All right, so here's a couple recordings of us at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And you see all the rocks around us right there. That's all the Precambrian basement rocks. And that's what creation scientists would place as being below all of the flood sediments, or the rock that's laid down by Noah's global flood, right? But I mean, man, this was one of the best trips I've ever been on. An incredibly hard hike. It was a great time with my brothers in Christ. I highly recommend you hike the Grand Canyon. Okay, let me first explain the rock cycle. That way everything else can be a little bit clearer as we move on. First, you start with lava. Okay, and that's molten rock, very hot, right? When lava cools, it becomes igneous rock. And different types of igneous rock include granite and rhyolite. Okay. Oh, also basalt is a type of igneous rock. It's just you find basalt more at the bottoms of the oceans, and then granite you'll find on the continents. Okay. Though most of the continents are not covered in granitic igneous rock, but mainly sedimentary rock. Okay. That's the second type of rock, sedimentary. You take a bunch of sediment and you turn it into a rock with high pressure. That's what it is. So if you take igneous and grind it down, maybe from other rocks, maybe from ice, like in the Ice Age, glaciers definitely grind down rocks a lot and make glacial till. Or if you get just weathering and erosion and you get sand from that, well, now we'll pressurize all that, a cementation effect occurs, and then you get sedimentary rock, right? And sandstone would be an example. There's also shale, there's also limestone. Now you take that sedimentary rock and you pressurize it again, and then you get metamorphic rock, right? There has to be heat and pressure to do this. And examples would be gneiss, schist, or marble. Marble is when you take limestone and you heat it up and pressurize it a lot, okay? To the point where any shells that may have existed inside of the limestone, seashells and other calcium carbonate creatures, all of that now is not visible in the marble because it's been changed at a very small structural level on the inside, right? So those are the three types of rock, and we're mainly going to be talking about sedimentary rock, but the other two will come into play as well. All right, now something very interesting exists under thousands of feet of rock in the Grand Canyon. It is a geological boundary that marks the foundation for the vast majority of the fossil-bearing rocks that exist in the canyon and in the world, really. This line between rock layers is called the Great Unconformity, also known as Powell's Unconformity. Now, both creationists and conventional geologists believe that the Great Unconformity exists all over the world. This line is an erosional boundary between the Sauk megasequence and the granite basement rock below. Megasequence is a fancy word for a package of sedimentary rock that extends to various places all over North America and even the globe. All of the Sauk megasequence must have been laid down by water flows or mud flows that exist under a large body of water. Now, one has to ask the question, how did this one package of sedimentary rock cover such a large area? The answer is that a giant area of the Earth had to be flooded by water at the same time, which was the mechanism by which the Sauk rocks were deposited. Now, even old Earthers agree that large parts of the Earth were underwater during certain periods of time, right? Maybe not all at once, but at certain periods of time, right? And so because the Sauk rocks cover most of North America, that means most of North America at one point had to be underwater, okay? Another interesting point is that the Great Unconformity, it's not a flat surface, but it gently rolls as if mechanically pulverized rather than simply eroded or weathered over hundreds of millions of years. The rock grains found in the granite below the unconformity are also in the sandstone above, along with some other dark, heavier grains which have been brought in from a region far away, like the Great Lakes or like the Appalachian Mountains, right? And that's over 1,000 miles away. So my conclusion when looking at this geological phenomenon is that this is at the very least a large part of the Earth was underwater at the same time, right? Cool. Much larger than the size of the local version of Noah's flood. Okay. Also, when you have certain dark grains that are present in that first layer of sedimentary rock, by the way, that's called the Tapete sandstone, and these dark grains had to be from the Great Lakes or they had to be from the Appalachians, you had to think they had to get all the way over to the Grand Canyon somehow. And so a massive conveyor belt system would accomplish that. Something like a large flood where all of it was underwater, not in some tranquil format, right, where the water was just relaxing on top of North America, but it was violent and rough, bringing large amounts of sediment all the way from the Appalachians all the way to the Grand Canyon.
Well, we have the Sauk mega sequence here, if you will, 1,000 feet of sandstone, shale, limestone that goes continent-wide. There are 4 other big sequence packages of strata that sit above it. Those are also very continuous like this. What we're seeing here is rather representative of the rest of the world.
There are, in fact, 6 megasequences in total on top of the Great Unconformity worldwide. In addition to the Sauk strata, we have the Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia, Absaroka, Zuni, and the Tejas megasequences. These layers have different names in other countries, but they can be found worldwide nonetheless. But old age and creation geologists agree that these packages of sedimentary rock strata were formed by floods. Now, the only exception to this, of course, comes from the Coconino sandstone in the Absaroka megasequence. Old age geologists actually believe this layer was formed from ancient desertification rather than from a flood. However, geologist Dr. John Whitmore argues against this conclusion.
And so one of the things that we've done is that we've measured these crossbeds and the angle of these crossbeds. And in a desert setting, these crossbeds should be right around 33 or 34 degrees. That's called the angle of repose. And as we've measured crossbeds in the Coconino, we've found that they average about 20 degrees. And that's a very consistent measurement, the same as that's been reported in the literature up to 60 years ago.
Okay. Now, fluvial geomorphologist Dr. Ron Neller says that at least 70% of the Earth's crust is covered in rock made from flood sediments. While there are some portions of the Earth not covered by sedimentary rock, such as the Canadian Shield, which is made of exposed igneous rock, or the Guyana Shield, which is exposed metamorphic rock, these can be easily explained by massive amounts of erosion caused by floodwaters running off the continents. In some regions, the deposited sediments remained, while in others, the flood's planation flow scoured off all the sediments. So, anyway, that's the first point of evidence that I have for you. Okay. Now, let's move on to evidence number 2 for a global flood, which is the Cambrian explosion. The Great Unconformity, it also divides the Precambrian strata below with the Cambrian strata above. Now, let's look at the fossil content for each of these packages of rock. Okay. The Precambrian strata, it does have some sedimentary rock in it. All right. And this rock is very sparse with fossils. It's primarily including soft body fossils like worms and jellyfish, also algae is included. Now, the Cambrian rocks, however, on the other side of the Great Unconformity, are so full of fossils that paleontologists have great difficulty explaining all of it. All sorts of hard-bodied sea dwellers like trilobites, Wiwaxia, which is an armored mollusk, and the Anomalocaris, which is an alien-looking shrimp, they emerge immediately in the fossil record in the Cambrian strata. Okay. There's no sign of their fossils on the other side of the Great Unconformity back in the Precambrian strata. I mean, to really help you understand this, essentially, a majority of all of the animal phyla that exist today, right? And phyla is the taxonomic category under kingdom, right? They all emerged at the Cambrian explosion. That lets you know how big of a deal this is in geologic time. Remember, with old Earth geology, you approach it with uniformitarianism, only gradual changes over time. So for them to say that, well, there's all of these fossils and then bang, all of these other fossils, it's almost like there was a very quick change, right? And which doesn't sit well with uniformitarianism, but it also doesn't sit well with evolution. Evolution can't explain changing from soft body creatures to hard body creatures in like roughly the blink of an eye. In the conventional 4.6 billion view of the Earth, the Cambrian period starts around 538 million years ago, meaning that for most of Earth's history, the majority of the phyla that exist today were not here. Only at the very end, at the last 12% of Earth's history, is where all of the animals arrive. Now, this puzzled Charles Darwin, since the drastic inclusion of animals in the fossil record challenges the claim of slow and gradual processes that Darwinian evolution requires. Famous evolutionary biologist and professor at Oxford, Richard Dawkins, noted concerning the Cambrian explosion, quote, "It is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history," end quote. Popular American paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould said, quote, "Nothing distressed Darwin more than the Cambrian explosion," end quote. As a result, conventional geologists assert that perhaps 500 million to a billion years of time elapsed after the Great Unconformity was laid down before the Salk megasequence with the Cambrian strata was deposited on top. Now, it seems to me that a 500 million to 1 billion year gap where zero sedimentation occurred on the basement rock under the Salk strata is called a rescuing device. Conventional old age geologists would rather not jettison evolutionary paradigms, so they insert a gigantic gap in the geologic record to explain away evidence that most phyla actually appeared in a blink of geologic time. Holding on tightly to an old Earth paradigm and to Darwinism, conventional geologists posit billions of years and no sedimentation to allow time for the absence of transitional fossils and for hard-bodied animals to evolve from the soft-bodied ones. Now, how probable is that? Old Earth geologists believe that the entire geologic column was incrementally built by small floods or ocean transgressions over billions of years. How is it that randomly for 500 million to 1 billion years, all of it stopped? They claim that this is when Snowball Earth happened, and large glaciers covered the entire planet. They don't have evidence of glaciation in southern latitudes for the most part, but geologists stick to this in order to explain the gentle rolling slopes of the Great Unconformity. Since the Precambrian surface is actually not flat but rolling, it must be some kind of erosional plain. Now, while a global flood is certainly capable of creating this erosional plain before depositing mountains of sediment on top, conventional geologists prefer not to accept this explanation. Now, there is abundant evidence of glaciation in more northern latitudes, which is why geologists believe in several different ice ages, where at maximum about 8% of the Earth's surface was covered by ice, which is 25% of the landmass. Instead of appealing to this elaborate rescuing device, it seems to me that catastrophism is the best way to explain scientific observation. Noah's flood under the catastrophic plate tectonics theory easily explains the deposition of large blankets of sedimentary rock on top of the Great Unconformity all over the globe. A global flood filled with massive amounts of sediment would bring about the perfect conditions for fossilization, too. That can explain the enormous amount of new phyla that appear in the Cambrian strata. Perhaps that strata is simply part of a global flood, where seafloor and continental sediments were mixed up in a slurry and deposited right on the Great Unconformity, carrying many deep ocean animals. Those are the animals found in the Cambrian strata, by the way. Very strange, deep ocean dwellers.
So one of the things that we can see here is that we've got communities. Right here, we have the Cambrian community. And that is on this side. If you want to think about the Grand Canyon, take the Grand Canyon, tip it sideways. Okay. So you tipped everything sideways. Here's the Great Unconformity.
All right.
Back over here, those are the granites and the non-fossil bearing rocks. The Great Unconformity, and then the first thing that we find is this community that has been pulled up and deposited and thrust over the continent and deposited in what's now Arizona. And inside that are things like these predatory critters called anomalocaris. You've got trilobites. There are sponge-like creatures down over here. There's little echinoderms. There's a functional community there.
Now, evidence number 3, folded layers of sandstone. Now, right on top of the Great Unconformity, the sedimentary rock called the Tapete Sandstone, which is about 100 to 300 meters thick, contains another interesting find: large bends in the rock strata, up to 90 degrees. The question is, how does the rock bend without shattering? Sandstone is a type of ceramic. It's hard and brittle. It's created when sand is compacted under great pressure and a cementation effect occurs, adhering all the grains together to make a continuous seam of rock. If you grab a piece of sandstone and try to bend it with a vise, it will probably shatter into small pieces. There are only 2 ways to actually bend sandstone. Number 1, it is placed under an immense amount of heat and pressure, and a bending force is applied at a slow rate. Number 2, the bending force is applied while it is still wet, and the cementation process has not occurred. Now, option 1 aligns well with the old Earth paradigm, where the magma under the Grand Canyon gradually pushed up the Tapete Sandstone with great heat over a long period of time, creating the Kaibab upwarp. Option 2 fits the global flood model, where all the sedimentary rock on top of the Great Unconformity was laid down within a year, and the Kaibab upwarp happened quickly, while the sediments were still wet. Now, geologists Dr. Andrew Snelling and Dr. John Whitmore took samples of the bent rock of the Tapete Sandstone in the Grand Canyon and sent it to a lab for analysis. The result was that the Tapete Sandstone shows no signs of the heating that would allow it to bend.
So after these months and months of looking at these thin slides, what did you find?
Well, I've put this on the screen deliberately because this is a sample that comes from right in the bend of that major fault in the Tapete Sandstone.
What does it tell you when you see that?
Well, it's in pristine condition. It hasn't changed. You know, this is in the hinge of that fault. You'd expect when the folding occurred, millions of years later, supposedly, that cement should have been disrupted. It should have been crushed. And maybe it would have to regrow again, but you'd still see fracturing that was healed. But you don't see that in any of this. You still see the original pores.
So it tells us that the cement was added after the rocks were bent.
Heating the grains would turn the sandstone into a metamorphic rock called quartzite, or possibly even gneiss, which would be visible under a microscope. Instead, the grains were clearly in a sandstone state pre-metamorphosis. What is the conclusion then? The Tapete Sandstone, and likely all other sedimentary rock that is folded in the Grand Canyon, was bent while it was still wet. This means that the sedimentary rock in the Grand Canyon region was all laid down quickly. Then the Kaibab upwarp happened in a short enough time for the layers to still be wet. Now, those layers, the mega sequences we talked about earlier, extend through gigantic portions of North America and can even be found across the globe. The Cambrian strata, of which the Tepete sandstone is the first part, can be found in the following regions across the globe: Pembrokeshire, Wales; British Columbia, Canada; Lena River, Siberia; Kangaroo Island, South Australia; Sirius Passet, Greenland; Yunnan Province, China. That's the Zhenjiang Mountain, if I pronounced that right. Bent or folded layers of sedimentary rock seem to be very strong evidence for a global flood, especially when the layers are deep below hundreds of meters of strata. It will be interesting to see if the same results can be duplicated in the Cambrian strata in other regions of the globe, or even for other bent rock layers. There is the folded mountain in Canada, or even the Seidling Hill in northwestern Maryland. Whenever you see folded or bent rock that is sedimentary and not metamorphic, you see evidence of great tectonic activity that happened soon after sediment deposition. Such conditions demand a global flood and are very hard for the conventional geologic paradigm to explain. And there you have it. 3 geological discoveries that I believe are evidence for Noah's global flood. Since there are massive global blankets of rock laid down by flood sediments, including the extreme majority of all the fossiliferous strata of the Earth, arranged in a way that challenges deep time and even includes bent sedimentary rock, the geological case for a global flood seems to be very strong, contrary to popular opinion. Great job making it all the way to the end. We at Truth Over Tea sincerely appreciate our viewers and are very thankful for your attention. May God bless you and have a nice day. We'll see you in the next video.